Welcome to Hearthside Lore. The Dark Elves. Introduction. Listen, young lord, and heed me well. I have been bidden to instruct you in the art of war. We Drukhai are the greatest exponents of warfare, and you must study hard so that you will not bring shame to the land of Nagaroth, your city, your house, and ultimately your lord and master King Malekith. You must learn to be cunning, for the slow-witted will be defeated by clever tacticians. You must be ruthless, for the honor-bound will lose the battle before it starts. But above all, you must learn to be merciless, for we cannot allow weaklings to thrive while traitors still hold our ancestral lands. Thus I will instruct you, as is the command of Malekith, rightful lord of Ulthuan, and one day you too may march your army upon the shores of our homeland. Hear, my lord of the Drukhai, from distant Cathay to the usurped lands of our accursed kin, from the cold lands of Norska to the streaming jungles of the Southlands, our armies are rightly feared. We alone keep alive the great and noble traditions of our ancestors of Nagaroth. Only we follow the path laid by mighty Anarion the Defender. Only we follow the true way. As it was in the ancient times, the glorious armies of the Witch King are drawn from the garrisons of our cities, bolstered by the elite formations such as the Executioners of Hag and the mighty Cold One Knights. To become a commander who is feared by his enemies, you must learn the strengths and capabilities of your troops by heart. Heed me well as I recite the warriors that make up the hosts of Nagaroth. The Elven Kingdoms. Far across the great ocean to the west of the old world lies the vast continent of Nagaroth. It is a harsh and rugged wilderness, above which dark clouds gather to unleash terrible storms upon the land. Beneath the massive mountain ranges lie a huge network of underground caverns, through which the Dark Elves sail their dread black arcs to launch surprise raids on the distant kingdoms of the old world, and further afield to Nippon and Cathay. But the principal target for Dark Elf invasion is the magical Isle of Ulthuan, the majestic homeland of all elven kind, from which this dark kindred were exiled many millennia ago. The Dark Host. Many and varied are the highly skilled warriors of the Witch King. Master the arts of strategy and tactics so that you might better settle the bitter debt owed by the fallen kin of Ulthuan. Unleash the fury of the Drukhai upon your foes, and be glad that you do Khaine's great work. Dark Elf warriors. Much of your army is raised from the population of our cities. Amongst our ranks march our wives and sisters, beautiful but deadly maidens who fight with the fury of demons. Above all other weapons, the guard favor the repeater crossbows, known as Uraithen, the Death Brain, and the Dronach, the Sky Piercer, a long, heavy-bladed spear. The long years of discipline and war have honed these guard into the finest warriors in the world. Do not scorn these citizen soldiers, for they have won many a battle, and their lives are expendable should an occasion arise when you must sacrifice part of your army to achieve a victory in the name of Malekith. Lead your army with conviction and brook no interference, but also do not overlook the pettier leaders who serve under you. Make your orders well known to the nobles and lordlings who bow to your command, that they may more effectively take to the field and execute your strategy. Fight well and bring victory to the Drukhai, and you shall know how great are the rewards for good service under the inspired rule of Malekith. Waste his soldiers, bring dishonor and shame upon our people, and you shall know that as our chosen king can be ungrateful, so too shall he avenge himself on those that fail him. Sorceresses. An army of Drukhai does not fight with silvered steel alone, for there are other powerful forces which can be bent to the will of a brave army general. Call upon the covens of the sorceress and entreat their aid, for their magical prowess will blight the warriors of the opposing army, scorch their souls from their bodies, and bring ruination and curses aplenty upon their heads. Be careful in your dealings with these beautiful creatures, though, for there is always a price to pay for their aid. Always. Hargoneth executioners. When talking about the warriors you can muster from amongst the population, it is worthwhile to discuss the city of Hargoneth, known as the cursed place by the slaves who are sent there. This city is devoted to the service of our great god Khaine, in his aspect as the executioner. Here the craft of death is held in the highest esteem. The elite warriors of this city are the executioners, and they are foremost amongst the warriors of the Witch King. Always ensure you deal well with the lords of Hargoneth, for no Drukhai wishes to feel his neck caressed by their deadly blades. Black Guard. If you are called upon to fight directly for the lordly Malekith, he may deign to send you a contingent of his personal guard. These are the Black Guard, the soldiery of our capital Nagaroth, and they are the fiercest fighters in all of the land of Chill. Wondrously ruthless and efficient on the attack and immovable in defense, the Black Guard are the terror of our enemies. However, do not misuse their abilities, for they owe loyalty only to the Witch King himself, and should they judge you to be at fault, you will answer to their deadly captain Coron. Such unpleasantness is to be avoided if you value your life and soul. Dark Riders. Ahead of the armies of Drukhai ride the heralds of Nagaroth, the dreaded Dark Riders, who will serve as your eyes and ears. They are masters of sudden attacks and daring raids, scouring the land in search of the foe, laying ambushes for their supply trains, and attacking with deadly speed against their reinforcements. Dark Riders are experts in the use of repeater crossbows, long cavalry spears, and wickedly curved swords. They ride fierce dark steeds taken from the stables of Illyrian, reared and brought to heel by the beast masters. There's a poetic justice to this, where the Illyrian weaklings dilute the natural fierceness and spirit of their steeds. Our beast masters bring it out with their whips and hot brands. Shades. While most of our folk live in the security of our fortified cities, one of the clans, the Shades of the Black Spire Mountains, is a notable exception. The Shades are a silent and deadly brotherhood of warriors who guard the mountain passes to the west. They live apart from the rest of dark elf society, waging an endless war against the enemies of Malekith. Many noble and proud warrior traditions of Nagaroth are kept alive by these mountain warriors, including the custom in which the newborn are treated. When an infant is born, its parents will leave it outside their tent for the first night of its life, and only if it survives is it deemed fit to be raised among the shades. Use the Shadow Brotherhood as your scouts and infiltrators, for none are more adept at the art of infiltration and reconnaissance. When the enemy is found and battle joined, your shades should harass them with their withering crossbow fire, disrupting their attacks and leaving them easy prey for the rest of your army. Cold One Knights. The nobles of the Drukhai ride to battle atop ancient reptiles known as Cold Ones. Only very few of us can take up the arms of the Cold One Knights, for the lizards savagely attack all who come near them, recognizing warm-blooded creatures by their smell. To avoid this, the Cold One Knights anoint themselves with the poisonous slime of the Cold Ones, so the beasts will accept them. There is a great price to pay, though, for the poison numbs the senses, so that the riders can no longer taste food or feel a touch. But it is a price worth paying, for the charge of the Cold One cavalry can shatter even the strongest enemy line. A fully armed and armored Cold One knight carries a long lance known as a Kaitan, Soul Eater, wears a reinforced helm and full-length armor, and on his arm is slung a shield carrying the device of his house. Though they are few in number, the charge of the Cold One Knights is a decisive weapon which can win you the battle at a crucial moment. Cold One Chariot. It is a symbol of great prestige to ride into battle upon the magnificent chariots of Nagaroth. These are given as gifts to warriors who have pleased our Lord Malekith with their devotion, bravery, and prowess in battle, accompanied by the roar of the Cold Ones and the thunder of wheels across the battlefield. A chariot smashing into the enemy is a sight magnificent to behold. Until recently, the Witch King himself rode to battle in such fashion, and, although in his wisdom our king has now renounced his decree for the great reclamation of our homeland, he once ruled that only he and no other was worthy of such a mount. Harpies. If you ever visit the distant city of Karkand-Kar, you will witness a spectacle that will fill you with elation and fear in equal measure. Upon the thermals of the sacrificial pyres soar the harpies, winged beasts with a savage primeval beauty. Some claim they are the souls of slain witch elves given form, others that they are a manifestation of Khaine in his aspect of the predator. They are creatures of Khaine, that is for sure, for they delight in the tormenting of their victims and feast upon raw flesh. The harpy is a sign of good fortune, and it is claimed that if they were ever to desert the city, it would fall to the enemy within 90 days. The Dark Fleet. At the core of our navy are the Black Arks, the great floating fortresses protected by the sorceress wards of our wizardry. Each Black Ark garrisons an army of corsairs, and is well equipped with the deadly Reaper bolt-throwers. Alongside them are the smaller vessels, the skiffs and slave-powered galleys, which bring our warriors rapidly to the shore or to board an enemy ship. Great creatures from the depths are raised above the waves by the chilling calls of the beastmasters, and atop the sea serpents and kraken our artisans raise defensive towers and shooting galleries. Corsairs. To be a corsair is a great honor amongst the Drukhai, and it is a chance to win riches and fame and capture slaves during their raids, for 1/10 of the loot captured by a corsair belongs to him. 4/10 go to his captain, and the remainder is the possession of the Witch King. These seafaring reavers excel at boarding other vessels, making them amongst our deadliest fighters in close combat. Reaper Bolt Thrower. Reaper bolt throwers are a testimony to the genius of our race. A mechanism of counterweights and strings allow this war machine to shoot a hail of barbed bolts or a single missile with much greater force. Reapers can be used at sea to clear the decks of enemy vessels, and on land to scythe down entire ranks of enemy warriors. The bolts of the Reaper are barbed, and thus difficult to remove from wounds, causing great agony and torment for those unfortunate enough not to die. However, such casualties often suffer such horrendous injuries that they are worthless as slaves and are best left to bleed to death, or given over to the bloody caresses of the Witch Elves. Devotees of Khaine. In honor of our great god Kela Mensha Khaine, the bloody-handed god of war and death, we have built mighty temples across our lands. Here the chosen brides of Khaine, the Witch Elves, practice the ancient rites and sacrifices under the watchful eyes of the Hag Queens. Each of our cities has a temple, and the rulers are required to pay a tithe to the Hag ruling over the Witch Elves within the temple. 1 slave in 10 that our raiders bring back to Nagaroth belongs to the temple, where a great honor awaits them as they are sacrificed to Khaine. After opening their chests with knives purified by dark venom, the hags bathe in their blood to restore their pact with the Lord of Murder. Few slaves understand or appreciate this great privilege. Witch Elves. Witch Elves are the maiden elves who are wedded to Khaine, the Lord of Murder, in midnight rites of blood sacrifice and magic. The decadent, fragile looks of the maidens of Ulthuan are nothing compared to the intoxicating beauty of the Witch Elves. Many are willing to die, and indeed often do, to see but a smile on the blood-red lips of the Witch Elves. Do not desire the touch of a maid, a bride of Khaine, for her life is wholly given to the Lord of Murder, and he is a jealous god, unwilling to share his chosen ones. Witch Elves go to war alongside the armies of our noble king, eager to prove themselves in the eyes of their god. For them, the battlefield is just another temple of Khaine, and the screams of the dying are praises sung in the honor of the bloody-handed god. Before battle, the brides of Khaine drink blood, laced with drugs, which fills them with bloodlust and rage. Then they throw themselves at the enemy, showing them the foolishness of opposing the Drukhai. Cauldron of Blood. A cauldron of blood is an ancient artifact of the long-gone days when the gods walked the earth. It is a gift from Khaine, the Lord of Murder, and within it lies the secret of eternal youth and beauty. A bride of Khaine may bathe in the blood-filled cauldron, and it will renew her vitality and youth. The few cauldrons that have survived the millennia are kept at the great temple of Grond, guarded by the high priestesses of the cult. One may be brought out to battle, but only in times of great bloodshed when the Witch Elf sect fights in strength. Assassins. During the revelries of the Death Night, the Witch Elves roam the streets of our cities, and all who cross their path are offerings to Khaine. Amongst those taken are young babes, who are offered up to the Lord of Murder in the cauldron of blood. Most perish, but those chosen by Khaine emerge unharmed, and are then initiated in the dark secrets of Khaine. They are raised to be dark elf assassins, the masters of death and the bringers of oblivion. All assassins follow one of the aspects of Khaine, the thousand-faced god of murder, and under his patronage their powers grow unrivaled by mere mortals. They become masters of the martial arts and learn the power of poisons. They are one of the most potent tools in the armory of the Witch King, and those lords foolish enough to question their loyalty to Malekith disappear swiftly. Each assassin strives to become more like our god. The rivalry between assassins is fierce, and all of them are constantly developing new killing techniques. There are no greater warriors amongst all elven kind than the adepts of Khaine. Beasts of Karond Kar. Karond Kar is the bastion of our beastmasters. Here are the stables where the beasts that serve our great cause are reared and trained, and where the stolen steeds brought up by the soft Illyrians are brought to bear by whip and red-hot brand. The folk of Karond Kar also tame the ferocious cold ones, hatch and hand-rear the beasts, and train them to accept riders. Beast Masters. Since the distant days of Nagaroth, our folk have been experts at bending beasts and animals to our will. However, some show exceptional aptitude in this, and can command even the unruliest beasts with a single word. They are the famed Beast Masters. When a child shows talent for taming animals, he is sent to the city of Karond Kar to study under the masters who dwelt there. The Beast Masters are also in charge of the slaves, for humans, orcs, and their like are no more than beasts themselves. Beast Masters are experts at getting the most out of their stock, and are always chosen from amongst the most robust and resourceful of our folk. War Hydra. The War Hydra is a titanic monster, a creature from the dark caverns below the Black Spine Mountains. It is a fearsome, scaled beast with many serpentine heads that belch smoke and fire and rend men with their sharp fangs. Since ages past, we have trained the Hydras to be used in war and break the lines of the enemy troops with their massive bulk and fiery breath. The Beast Masters of Karond Kar continually experiment with different breeds and use magic to bring the natural ferocity of these beasts to new heights. Manticore. You should hold no creature in higher esteem than the Manticore, for it is one of the 1,000 aspects of our Lord Khaine. With the body of a titanic lion, larger than any of the predators of the mountains, wings of a huge bat, whip-like tail, and fury to match that of Khaine himself, Manticores reign supreme in the mountains of our northern border. Manticores are sacred beasts, captured, reared, and trained by the Beast Masters as steeds for the lords of Nagaroth. For in battle, they can unleash the fury of the bloody-handed god upon our enemies. Beast Masters often ride these majestic beasts themselves as proof that they can break the will of these most unruly of creatures. Dark Pegasus. Dark Pegasi are favored mounts of the sorceresses, found amongst the peaks of the highest mountains. They are ferocious hunters in the wilds, a trait which can easily be turned to useful purpose in our armies. The Black Dragon. The great worms that slumber under the peaks of the Black Spine Mountains are dark in their hue. No one knows for sure the origin of these ancient serpents. Some say that they are hatchlings of the dragon eggs taken from the ancient nests of Calador that were then reared by the Beastmasters, while others claim that they are servants of Khaine sent to this world. Only the greatest lords amongst the Dark Elves ride to battle atop one of these monsters, which, even alone, have the power to break the back of an army. The Dark Art. Only by the divine will of the Witch King is a Drukhai allowed to study the high art of magic. It is the vitality and power of our magic which sustains us, destroys our enemies, and empowers our black arcs. Those who succeed in the 12 tests of a sorceress are found worthy to embrace the dark art in all its majesty. They become members of one of the 6 convents of sorceresses, ever ready to serve the Witch King. Those who fail, and yet survive, will serve the cause of Lord Malekith in more menial ways, as mindless slaves. A sorceress must walk the dark paths of the realm of chaos, the deep pits of the oceans, and the raging bowels of the fiery mountains in her quest for knowledge. The channeling of the raw winds of chaos and the binding of these forces give the sorceress her power. The creatures of the chaos hells will bow to her will in the end. Such power is vast, but dangerous, and the aspirant to the dark convent of the sorceresses must be courageous and strong. She must be wedded first and foremost to the great Witch King, and so may never take a husband nor sire children. Thus also the Witch King is alone among our fathers and forefathers, able to wield the powers of the darkest abyss. From the 6th Book of Secrets by Khalid Tor of Clar Karond. Thick smoke rose from the 12 sacrificial temples of the city of Nagaroth, imbuing the entire city with its rich, sweet odor. Today was the Harvest of Souls, one of the many festivals of dedication to their god Khaine. Each noble family would try to better their neighbors by sacrificing the most slaves. Those families who were generous in their donations would be blessed by the sisterhood and spared their wrath on Death Night. The dark elf children eagerly waited at the temple doors, where the priestesses would hand them the severed heads of those slain. The young elves would then race each other to stick their trophies upon spikes that bristled on the parapets of the high city walls. Inside the temples, after disemboweling their victims and placing their hearts and entrails on the sacrificial pyres, the witch elves would remove their flesh and sew it together in large sheets. A family's status was measured by the size of these macabre decorations, which would be draped along the length of the city walls. Blood flowed through the city streets, but high above the frenzied debauchery, Malekith sat, oblivious to the festivity below. He had witnessed countless celebrations of death and cared little about such matters. From a window in the tallest tower of the city, the highest point in the whole of Nagaroth, he turned his gaze towards the east. Nagaroth was his land to do with as he chose. Each and every soul belonged to him, and should he choose, he could crush them at will. But it was not enough. Whilst his people reveled in their own self-indulgence, his enemies grew stronger. Even now in Ulthuan, the pathetic warriors of Eltharion boasted about how they had successfully led an army to the shores of Nagaroth. Until then, no mortal had set foot on his land without permission. This was a sign that his people were growing weak, decadent in their self-belief. Some blamed this on the growing influence of the underground cults. Even today, whilst the people rejoiced through slaughter in the name of Khaine, there were those who preferred to place their faith with other gods. He cared not for such affairs. The backstabbing and internal politics of the Dark Elves served to strengthen his people. Amidst the poison and the plotting, the weak would die in order that the strong prevail. Whilst such treachery thrived and blossomed, his race's hearts grew colder and harder. It was as he wished it to be. Malekith turned from the window and strode over to his throne. Carved from the bones of those whom the Witch King had slain, blood flowed from the open sockets of skulls at the base of the dais. To the left of the throne rested a long sword with wicked barbed edges. It had been too long since he had wielded his weapon. Malekith felt his hatred of the high elf race surge. His anger flared, raging like a wildfire. It grew in intensity. Destroyer, his magic blade, would tonight taste blood again. As the fury coursed through his body, it numbed the pain of his burns. His body had been horribly mutilated when he had attempted to pass through the sacred flame of Asuryan. And even now, Malekith found swamping his emotions in hatred was his only escape from the burning anguish. The bitter memory of his injuries intensified his desire to kill. He strode purposefully to the balcony, where his black dragon sat, woken from its sleep as it sensed the rising malice that was growing inside its master. Malekith mounted the steed, and without any word of command, the great beast launched itself off the balcony, plummeting to the ground like a hawk diving for prey, invisible through the thick smoke to those below. Master and beast let out a wrath-filled howl that sent a shiver of fear down the spine of even the Hag Queen herself. Each dark elf in the city knew that the Witch King was seeking vengeance. In the midst of festivity, their master had declared that war was at hand, and, as his people, they were bound to join him. Masters of evil. For thousands of years the Dark Elves have ruled Nagaroth. In that time there have been many among their number who have risen to greatness, infamous across the world for their acts of depravity and skill at arms. They are the stuff of nightmares, their names told to small children across the old world, to get them to behave. They are the darker shadows in the night, the creatures that prey on the weak, the hunters who never tire. Malekith, Witch King of Nagaroth. Malekith was the son of Anarion, the first of the High Elf Phoenix Kings, and the mysterious and beautiful seeress, Morathi. He grew to be a mighty warrior, a great sorcerer, and a brilliant general. When Anarion died, a brief time of peace followed, and there were many elves who believed that Malekith, a ruthless warrior who had proven himself in the harsh war-torn lands of Nagaroth, was unsuitable to take his father's place as king. Belshazzar was chosen to rule in his stead. Malekith bitterly accepted their decision and took on the role of commander of the Ulthuan army. He proved to be a brilliant young general, for many decades gaining power and allies with his glorious victories. Then one dark winter, he made his move to usurp the throne. Claiming that the Phoenix King was a follower of chaos, he secretly assassinated him by means of an undetectable poison. Believing the throne to be his by right, he stepped into the flames of a Saurian to prove himself worthy. But the flames would not accept his polluted body. Instead, they engulfed his soul, casting him out and leaving his mortal body terribly scarred. Morathi carried her injured son from the temple and nursed him back to health over many years. As Malekith gradually recovered, he ordered that a suit of armor be forged and had it fused to his own withered body in order that it would lend him its magical strength. To the brow of the great horned helmet was welded the circlet of iron, a talisman of awesome sorceress power. He set about waging a civil war, and although he was forced into exile after defeat within the lands of Ulthuan, he traveled west and discovered a new continent which he claimed for himself, naming the kingdom Nagaroth. For over 5,000 years he and his followers have continued to wage war against the Phoenix Kings. Countless numbers of elves have been slain in the bitter civil war, and Malekith has come close to claiming the throne that is rightfully his many times. His last incursion into the land of Ulthuan was only repulsed after 2 years of relentless warfare. Now the Witch King has a new weapon with which to cast a shadow over the realm of the High Elves. Over thousands of years he has been secretly hoarding a clutch of dragon eggs. Now, the first of the hatchlings have matured. Trained by the skilled beast masters over a period of many centuries, the young dragons have grown strong and are at last ready for battle. Malekith now rides Seraphon, the strongest of the first batch. His finest knights have been tutored to ride these terrible beasts into battle, and with them, Malekith plans to unleash a deadly assault upon the forces of Ulthuan. Morathi, the Hag Sorceress. After the Witch King himself, Morathi is the most powerful dark elf in all of Nagaroth. Born to scheming and politics and a talented sorceress, Morathi has spent 5,000 years teaching her son all she knows of statecraft and magic, and works to maintain his grip on the throne of Nagaroth. Morathi has always had the taint of chaos about her. She met Malekith's father Anarion, the first Phoenix King, when the Elven Lord rescued her from a chaos warband. It is believed that it was during her time as a captive that chaos first crept into her soul. It was Morathi who started the cult of pleasure on Ulthuan, which eventually led to the bloody civil war of the Sundering. Morathi also first perfected the dark art, opening up gateways to the chaos hells to receive unimaginable powers. Combined with her beauty and intellect, it is Morathi's magical abilities which allow her to hold sway over her enemies. Morathi is the first Hag Queen of the Witch Elves, and although the sect now follows her rival, Helebron, many who worship at the Temple of Khaine owe loyalty to the sorceress. It is also claimed that Morathi brought forth the first cauldron of blood, some say given to her by bloodthirsty Khaine himself. Once a year on Death Night, she bathes in the boiling blood within the cauldron, rejuvenating her old, tired flesh, and emerging from the stream as young and beautiful as the days she left the shores of Ulthuan. No other hag queen has lived as long as Morathi, and Helebron, forbidden access to the true cauldron of blood, withers and ages with every passing year. It is a source of much bitterness between them. It is Morathi, and Morathi alone of the Witch Elves, who is allowed to wield magical power. Like her son, Morathi feels no shame in creating laws and traditions for the control of others, whilst ignoring them herself. Over the millennia, Morathi has struck demonic pacts with many vile and disturbing forces, and can unleash the power of chaos with a thought. She is capable of the most powerful magics possible, and some believe it was her plan to destroy Ulthuan's magical vortex and unleash the hells of chaos upon the world. Morathi is totally dedicated to her son, as he is to her, and though some would say their relationship is unnatural, between them they rule Nagaroth with an iron grip and bloodied sword. Malus Darkblade, Scion of Hag Graef. The tale of Malus Darkblade is one of greed, treachery, and much bloodshed. Born of one of the noble families of Hag Graef, Malus was the pride of his father, ruthless, bloodthirsty, cunning, and ambitious. To further his own political power, Malus sought out an ancient magical treasure, but in discovering it, he also found something much older and more terrible. Malus was possessed by the demon Zarkan. His life and soul were forfeit. He had but one way of escaping his fate, to find 5 unholy artifacts of power which could be used in the ritual to free Zarkan for eternity and restore Malus's soul. He had but a year and a day to succeed. Long and hard was his quest for the 5 treasures, and many were his battles along the way. Many foes fell beneath his blade. Foul minotaurs, orcs, and a mighty dragon ogre lie dead in his wake. Such was Malus's determination and ruthlessness that he slew his own father for possession of the dagger of Torxus, one of the artifacts needed for his salvation. For this, the Dark Elf bards also call Malus the Kinslayer. Upon the eve of his doom, Malus returned to the place of his possession and performed the ritual, but Zarkan had tricked the Dark Elf Lord. Upon escaping from Malus's body, the treacherous demon took his soul as well, and thus Darkblade became known as the Soulless One. Caught between life and death, Malus wandered the chaos wastes for a decade, fighting and killing for others. He cared not whether he lived or died, and so fought in battle like no mortal creature. Armed with the warp sword of Khaine, the only artifact not destroyed in the ritual to free himself, Malus was unstoppable, and though he craved death, there was none skilled or strong enough to defeat him. It was during this time that Malus learned of the new lair of Zarkan from a sorcerer. The magic user knew of Darkblade's treacherous nature, and hoped to forestall any betrayal by having the map tattooed to his back. Malus cared not, and flayed the map from the sorcerer, feeding the rest to his cold one, Spite. Once more Malus traveled many leagues, and fought against many creatures of the 4 powers, and his own enemies from Nagaroth, before locating the demon who had stolen his soul. Unfortunately for Malus, the resting place of Zarkan was within the realm of the screaming god-child, a twisted being sworn to chaos undivided, a hell place at the heart of the realms of chaos, from which it was claimed that no mortal could pass back. But Malus, the master of cunning, tricked the screaming god-child and managed to escape. Upon realizing the devious Malus had eluded him, the screaming god-child cursed the dark elf, and as punishment once more imprisoned Zarkan within him. Now, after many years of journeying, Malus has returned to Hag Graef. None know his true intentions, but he has lost none of his thirst for power. The Slave's Tale. My name is Hargan. My second name is of little consequence. Once I felt the tenderness and love of a warm, caring family, but they are gone. Whether they still live or not is of no importance, for emotion is a luxury that has long since been lost to me. Once in what seems like another lifetime, I remember I was scribe to the burgomeister of Marienburg. It is with trembling hands that I now put quill to paper. Much of my soul they destroyed, but not my ability to write. They could not vanquish that, not without severing my hands. But I would not have been able to labor day and night for them, toiling without nourishment or rest. Who are the faceless they I talk of? They are evil incarnate. They are fear in its purest form. This I write in order that others may learn of them. They must be stopped. Who has the power to defeat them? I cannot say. My home was once a small village on the outskirts of Marienburg. They came in the dark of night, striking with the swiftness of a falcon, silent and in small numbers. They did not need many. Such was their skill and stealth. They were on us before any alarm was raised. My only solace was that my wife was visiting relatives in the next village. From my bed they dragged me outside. I remember how my neighbor's child cried, his mother trying to comfort him. But the child sensed his mother's fear, and his wailing did not cease. They tore the screaming child from his mother's arms and took him away. I remember the silence that followed, and how haunting it felt. No one ever spoke of the child again, and his mother was silent in her despair. At knife point we were led to the dark vessel. A great mountain, blacker than night, loomed before us. Tall spiked towers reached into the sky, obscuring the constellations. It was then that I knew that our gods had forsaken us. On a small boat we were carried to the nightmarish floating citadel. At times the calm sea would be broken by the gigantic ripples of some terrible beast beneath the surface. What horrors lurked in the waters where I had once swum, I dared not guess. On reaching the fortress we were chained together, and so it was we were taken single file down into the depths of the black ark, silent, save for the ominous rattle of our chains. We stepped down a steep spiral stairway. For what seemed like an eternity, we marched into the bowels of hell. Occasionally a hideous scream from one of the passageways off the stairwell would chill my soul with a deep fear. It was soon the fear born of the knowledge that sometime soon the despair I felt in my heart would join that chorus of pain. Like cattle we were crammed into a dark chamber. On wooden racks we slept. There was no latrine, nor was there enough room for a man to stretch to his full length. For how long we were kept like this I cannot tell, nor do I choose to guess. The filth that covered us soon developed into sores, and before long disease was rampant. Our sleep was disturbed by the cries of those suffering from delirious fevers. The man chained next to me, a simple goatherd from the village, grew weaker with lack of sustenance. For many nights his body was racked with a heavy fever before he was finally granted peace in death. By the time they finally unchained him from my side, his corpse was bloated, and maggots feasted on his putrid flesh. Others would occasionally join us, some of them races that I knew not from where they came. There was no conversation between us. I remember 2 of the foreigners were caught in conversation by a guard. He drew his wicked blade and sliced their tongues from their mouths. Both died a few hours later from choking on their own blood. Slowly I succumbed to the nameless disease that crept upon us. In a delirium of fever, I can vaguely remember being led from the chamber back up the stairway. How my legs were able to carry my emaciated body, I cannot say. My first sight of the dark city of Harganeth was one tinged with the madness of my condition. Each of the tall towers was crowned with a hellish skull that tormented me in my delusion, visions of our mortal future. They mocked me. Death was amongst us, and my mind had little trouble conceiving that we had been transported to hell. Only 3 of the 30 slaves who had been taken from my village remained alive. We were separated into groups, and sharp-barbed spears prodded us towards our new masters, who stood waiting at the end of the dock. Kehmor is my name. I am the slave master of Lord Yeurl, and that is all you pitiful wretches need to know of me. Gone are the days when your lives were made complex by the choices that freedom allowed you. Your life will be simple now. Obey me, or die. I recall his words well, even though my mind was clouded by illness. As each of us passed him, he branded our left chest with the mark of Yeurl. A black rune now scars the spot where I once perceived my heart to lie. Our new quarters were little better than those on the Ark. Cold stone replaced the wooden racks, but we were still chained and crushed together. We were to work in the mines, digging the ores that would enable this race to forge more of their weapons, more power with which they could pillage and conquer. It was an endless cycle of despair. Night and day became concepts that existed only in my dreams. Soon, I ceased to even dream. We were chained together by solid steel spiked neck collars, more like beasts than men. If one of us should collapse from exhaustion, the guards would sever his head from his body with great blades rather than unlock his collar. Even in our brief times of rest they would appear. Sometimes they would give us raw meat on a plate. Where it came from I dared not think, eating it with savage greed like some feral beast. Sometimes they would enter the cell and take one of us away. Of the poor soul's fates I cannot say. Screams of pain would usually follow such abductions. For how long I continued to slave in the mines, I cannot estimate. But one morning, I was led out of the cell by the guards. My mind raced with visions of the torments that I was about to suffer. But fate spared me any real anguish. I was taken to the forests, where I was to cut down the mighty pines that covered the mountainside. Their girth is such that it would take 10 men to link arms around even the smallest of these giant firs. For countless centuries these ancient trees had grown, but, as is the wont of these dark masters, they were cut down in spiteful greed. We would be forced to work in the savage rain and biting snow, with just torn rags for clothing. Though the fierce weather of Nagaroth nearly killed me, it was these same foul conditions that granted me freedom. On one wet, cold morning I found an old dagger at the foot of one of the trees. Tempted as I was to slay my evil master, I knew that swift retribution would follow. The damp mines and the rain had gradually caused my collar to rust. That night I used the dagger, which I had smuggled into my cell, to work loose my shackles. The next day, as soon as we reached the forest, I broke free and fled. Up into the mountains I ran, and though my legs ached with exhaustion, I found the strength in the knowledge that I was free. Behind me the beast-like hounds of my masters bayed. Through the icy streams I swam to turn their keen nostrils from my scent. For many days they pursued me. A lone slave was of no importance to them. They hunted me down for their own pleasures. Occasionally I would spy my former captors riding atop great monstrous lizards. The thought of being caught would send a shiver of pure fear through me. These beasts looked capable of tearing me apart, as though I was a piece of parchment. High in the jagged, dark mountains I hid, always heading west. I did not know to where, but my destination was any place away from the murderous attentions of those who sought to enslave me. My captors called the mountain range the Spiteful Peaks. They were aptly named, for they gave no nourishment to me. Neither beast nor plant survived in these accursed rocks. On the third day a monstrous shadow passed overhead. I do not know what manner of creature it was, but its head was that of a lion, yet it flew with the wings of a great worm. In my past I would have thanked Sigmar that he made the beast blind to my presence, but Sigmar had long since deserted me. That evening I spied tendrils of smoke rising into the sky. Cautiously I approached. If it were my hunters, then I would face them, and with my dagger take as many as I could to their graves. I neared the encampment. It was not the cold, sharp tongue of the Druki that met my ears. In the stranger's conversation, I heard the unmistakable accents of Tilea and Estalia. Then my heart rose as I heard the familiar rough accent of a Middenlander. I dared not approach immediately, but instead sat for a while listening to their talk. Much time had passed since I last heard warm conversation, but finally the lure of cooked meat bade me approach. Now I sit here, in those very same hills. Over the past months many others have flocked to our group. Rumors of a slave army have given a heart to many, and have lent them the will to escape and join us. But now they have also brought the enemy to us. We have amassed a small amount of equipment from raids into enemy encampments, but I would be loath to call us an army. We are ill-nourished, and have only hatred of those who seek to enslave us as our weapon. Still, if we are to inspire any hope for others, we know that we must go to war. As the most learned member of the group, I have been chosen as their leader, yet I have no experience of war. I write this on the eve of battle with my former master, Lord Yeurl. In our hearts, we know we are defeated, yet should this letter manage to find its way into safe hands, then know this: it is better to die fighting this cold, evil race than suffer the unthinking torment that they will surely inflict upon you. With this I leave to meet my fate on the field of battle. But know this, whatever may pass, I will not be taken alive. The Founding of Nagaroth, as told by Furion of Clark Carond. I was old even when the world was still young, and thus it is I who writes of the long-gone days, of millennia of hate, treachery, and betrayal. I write to you, young Drukhai, for I know the truth. I have stood among the ruins of Onlek. I have circled the world on my black ark, the Claw of Dominion. I will tell of the world as it was, for I have eaten the fruit of the black tree, and by the will of the Witch King, I have lived through ages even as my comrades have died. Thus I can tell you, elf of true blood, of your past. Though we have wandered far to this land called the New World by the hairy barbarians, the usurper humans, we have not forgotten the spires of Anlek and our forests of pale gray trees, for this place was not always our home. Your true home and mine lies far away from here, across the sea of chaos. Once, Nagaroth was the greatest of Elven Kingdoms. The beauty of our northern shores were famed throughout the world, and the folk of Nagaroth were known as the greatest warriors of all elven kind. There were also lesser elven kingdoms, pale shadows of Nagaroth, insignificant in importance compared to our glory. Anarion and the First War against Chaos. It was Anarion the Defender, first Phoenix King, the ruler of Nagaroth, who waged a war against the minions of the Four Powers in the immeasurably distant past. He wed Lady Morathi and sired Malekith, the greatest of all elves who has lived. Anarion fought, and we the folk of Nagaroth fought beside him. After the first war against Chaos, we stood victorious, and all of Ulthuan was in our debt. Anarion was slain in battle, and, quite rightfully, his son Malekith requested the scepter of Ulthuan for himself, for he was son of the king, born to rule, and the only elf with a legal claim to the throne. But there were jealous lords, petty princes of lesser kingdoms who opposed noble Malekith with all their might. Rather than start a civil war, in his infinite wisdom Malekith suggested a vote for the throne. The ungrateful curs cast their votes and chose one of their own to take a task which was far beyond his capabilities. It was an outrageous insult to all of Nagaroth, and yet Malekith was first to acknowledge the rule of the lesser elf, Belshazzar, the explorer, better known in our legends as the Peddler King. Over the years, Lord Malekith became ever more concerned. The enemies of the elves had not disappeared, but Belshazzar did nothing to counter these threats. Long Malekith worked to strengthen the realm, but it was to no avail. Instead of facing the threat of the dwarves, who were bound to become our future enemies, Belshazzar cultivated peace agreements with the stunted folk. Blinded by greed, he encouraged the trade with the hairy ones, when he should have prepared for war. The future would show how right Malekith was. The glory of Nagaroth. While the rest of Ulthuan cavorted, the people of Nagaroth preserved our true heritage, and led by their lords, they trained in the skills of war and raised the art into new heights. The cult of pleasure produced the greatest songs of the age, and elves like Auric and Azabai made the most delicate and lifelike sculptures to grace the gardens of delight of Lady Morathi. Never has such beauty graced the known world, and not until we have claimed our rightful lands will it be recreated. But the princes of other kingdoms grew envious and coveted the riches of Nagaroth. They falsely accused Lady Morathi of treason and claimed that the cult of pleasure which she led planned to overthrow the king. Seeing no other way to save his people and his blood kin from outright war, Lord Malekith called upon all his cunning and devised a plan to save the kingdom. He took control of the investigations into the innermost matters of the cult, turning the agents of the Phoenix King against the petty princes who plotted the downfall of Nagaroth. But in the end, Malekith had no choice but to summon the lords of Ulthuan to the shrine of Asuryan to reveal the greatest traitor of all. Here Lord Malekith took Belshazzar to the Chamber of Days in the shrine. Therein rests the Stone of Destiny, which shows the events of the future in fiery letters, and here was revealed the eventual downfall of the Elves, thanks to the incompetence of Belshazzar. Belshazzar, confronted with the magnitude of his failure, took poison as the traitor he was. Now Malekith prepared to save elvenkind, but upon hearing of Belshazzar's death, the petty princes drew their swords against Lord Malekith. Fools! They were like children facing a god. Long did Malekith try to make them see their folly, but finally he was forced to cut them down to defend his life. To claim his rightful throne, Malekith donned the feathered cloak and stepped into the flames of Asuryan, for this is the way that the ruler of all Elven Kingdoms is crowned to his office. But the envious princes had foreseen our lord's rightful bid for the throne, and cast vile curses upon the flames of Asuryan. In the most tragic event of Druchii history, our lord was horribly scarred by the cursed flames, and his servants took him back to the north to be nursed back to health by Lady Morathi and her priestesses. The first war of betrayal. Meanwhile our enemies did not rest, but roused a rabble with their claims of the treachery of King Malekith. They placed a Caledonian thug known as Imric on the throne, and after assuming the name Caledor, this ruthless tyrant started amassing armies to slay Malekith, whom he greatly and rightly feared. Soon armies of the Pretender threatened our borders, and finally we were forced to draw arms against our misguided and envious brothers, the spearmen and archers of Kothik, the charioteers of Tiranoc, and the cavalry of Illyrian, trampled the fields of Nagaroth underfoot. But we knew great sorceries, and no decadent elven kingdom could match the glory of our arms. The lords of Trace, Kothik, Illyrian, and Tiranoc could not withstand us, but fled howling before our weapons back to their pitiful abodes, there to brood, lick their wounds, and plot petty revenge. Seeking to end the bloodshed once and for all, we pursued them, cutting through the traitorous kingdoms of Tiranoc and Illyrian like a fiery sword. From all over the Elven Kingdoms, those loyal to the rightful King Malekith gathered. From Safri came the great mages who had cast their auguries and seen the just cause of our Lord Malekith. From Caledor came skilled priests who had grown disillusioned with the crippled god Vol and offered their services as weaponsmiths. While war raged, King Malekith called his armorers to him, and aided by Hotek, a wise and just noble who had once followed Vorl. They fashioned an unrivaled suit of armor. The king then mounted Balrog, his dragon, and was made ready for battle, and the glorious armies of Nagaroth loyally followed behind him. Thus began the longest war, and it will end when the last of our repugnant cousins is dragged screaming to the altar of Khaine. 7 great battles Malekith fought, and he won them all. But Khalador the traitor rallied numberless hordes of his kin, bound by lies and empty promises. By treachery and luck, Khalador defeated King Malekith at the marches of Maldor, and with a fell blow slew great Balrog. The Great Ritual. Now Malekith, determined to defend his kingdom, called the wisest sages amongst his followers and prepared a great ritual. He planned to unravel the great vortex and summon the very legions of chaos to earth and bind them to his will. The priestesses of Lady Morathi, mightiest mages of the world, readily agreed. They would have succeeded had not a craven traitor, Urathion of Ular, betrayed his lord and slipped away to inform the fops of Hoeth, hoping for the reward of gold. For this deed he was slain by Kithan the master assassin, and to this day demons rend his soul in the void. It has been claimed that the power of chaos could have escaped from our control, but I was there, and I knew our strength was sufficient. We were and are the masters of chaos, and the howling powers of the void are our servants. But the twisted scholars of Hoeth, alarmed by Urathion, disturbed the shades of the deceased resting in the Isle of Dead, and their ghastly spells unleashed a terrible force to sink the lands of Nagaroth. A tidal wave, fully 1,000 feet high, crashed upon our beautiful lands. To save our people from this cataclysm, the wizards of King Malekith cast great spells, and the palaces and fortresses of Nagaroth broke free and floated on the surface of the waves and amongst the skies. Thus were created the Black Arks, and our folk survived, preserving our legacy. But our great and beautiful kingdom was drowned under the waves. We grieved the wrongs done to us, and swore revenge. We did not need great patience for a chance to exact our vengeance, for Khalador built a navy and dared to bring it against our mighty Black Arks and wave-dancing vessels for many years, until our spells brought a storm upon his fleet and separated his ships. Our glorious fleet, which ruled the waves then as it does now, descended upon him. Rather than face the rightful king and his justice, Khalador took the coward's way out and committed suicide, jumping into the sea in full armor. Thus passed Khalador the traitor. It was a fitting end to an elf who had wrought so much harm upon his rightful liege lord. The construction of 6 cities and the Dwarf Wars. Without Khalador leading them, the cowards of Ulthuan had little courage to harry us further. Thus the war ended, and we retreated to Nagaroth, named after the memory of our beautiful lands, and fortified our abodes. We scoured the lands, exterminated and enslaved the repulsive human barbarians who lived there, and prepared for the war that was to come. Our masons built 6 great cities that were divided amongst the lords of our folk. Nagaroth, the Tower of Chill, was reserved for King Malekith. Grond was granted to the house of Kalamp, and as the bastion of the cult of Kayla Mensha Khaine, the bloody-handed god, Hag Graef, Karond Kar, Har Goneth, and Klar Karond, the port of our navy, were divided between the king's most loyal followers. It took us many long years to erect our towers and build our defenses, and meanwhile our kin in Ulthuan found new enemies, the race of dwarves in the distant lands of the east. Some have said that it was the Drukhai who incensed the ugly folk against the effete princes of Ulthuan, but know now that these things are mere lies, and worse than lies. The dwarves hardly needed an excuse to begin the war, and our misguided cousins were quick to start hostilities. Thus was Malekith's prediction proved correct, and the dwarves became the enemies of the elf race. For an entire age the armies of the pretender ruler of Ulthuan and the dwarf kings slew each other, and how we laughed at the reports of their folly. It is a testimony of the weakness of Ulthuan that they failed to crush those upstarts swiftly and mercilessly. Finally, Kalador II managed to disgrace our entire race by falling under the axe of the dwarf king Gotrek Starbreaker in single combat. I spit on his memory. The war in the north. Our auguries chose that time to unleash our armies upon Ulthuan once more. When we finally attacked, we drove the elves of Ulthuan to the southern lands in an irresistible force. From the rubble rose the city of Tor-on-Lek once again, the blazing diamond in the shattered crown of Nagaroth. We, the true rulers of Ulthuan, had returned. War raged across the isle, and much which was rightfully ours was regained. For centuries our ancestral lands were ours to rule and govern, and despite the necessities of war, propensity and unsoiled heritage flourished. But then Tethlis the Butcher, the scourge of life, was elected to rule Ulthuan. He was a relentless enemy, and succeeded in whipping the soft elves of Ulthuan into something resembling a fighting force. With a huge army he besieged Onlek, and when, after a long and bitter battle, the city fell, he ordered all Drukhai survivors to be slain, including all our families who had returned to live in the land of their forefathers. From that day on, we vowed never to show mercy to our twisted kin. Thus the weaklings of Ulthuan brought a terror upon their heads. The last bitter battle, the Battle of the Waves, was fought in the Blighted Isle, which we guarded against those who would desecrate the holy place of Khaine with their presence. Our armies fought valiantly, but to no avail. We were too heavily outnumbered. The altar of Khaine and the promised scepter of our king, which rests there, were lost to our lesser brethren. One day it shall be ours again, and unnumbered will be the souls offered to him upon its ancient blood-stained stone. Ah, glorious Khaine, a feast shall be his. The age of hateful peace. In Ulthuan, Bel-Korhandis succeeded Tethlis to the throne, continuing the long masquerade of false kings. He displayed new depths of corruption, so low had his kind sunken. As we built our navy and sent our armies to consolidate our hold over the Northlands, he emptied the coffers of Ulthuan to build a tower of colossal proportions to match his ego. Here he collected decadent works of art and filled his court with sycophants and courtiers who eroded the last vestiges of the elven spirit. Thus our weakling kin studied poetry, dancing, gardening, and other nonsense, and we watched gleefully how they ran down their armies and forgot the last of the noble military tradition of our past. Truly they had become less than nothing, and scarcely worthy of bearing the name of elves, the first speakers. But we, with our memories burnt into our minds by the heat of battle, had forgotten nothing of our knowledge, and our wisdom grew over the centuries of hateful peace. During these years we built and planned. The war bands of chaos worshippers had long harried our northern border, and thus King Malekith, in his wisdom, ordered the construction of a series of fortresses to guard our lands. From that day on, the rampaging chaos hordes were kept in check. Our black arks established colonies in the southern continent of Lustria, and in the far lands of Cathay. We fought many wars against the dragon throne of Cathay, and our victorious armies brought back many wonders of the East to enrich our kingdom and fill the Witch King's treasuries. Years flew by and centuries passed, yet another new king rose in Ulthuan, even more decadent than Bel Corhandis, and we seized our chance. Even if we would have been allowed to choose the next so-called Phoenix, we could have hardly found a more inept ruler than Aethys the Weakling, the poet king of Safri. Aethys completely neglected the armed forces and the navy, like the fool he was. With the guard of Ulthuan down, we struck secretly, silently, and yet with all the customary power of Drukai. The bravest of our kin, and most talented in intrigue and webs of politics, went secretly to Ulthuan, and over the years their influence spread. We eventually had agents even at the court of the Phoenix King. They spread rumors of the death of great Malekith, lulling the toads of Ulthuan into a false sense of security. In secret, we controlled much of the Elven Kingdoms, without our lazy, blinded former kin ever suspecting. For long years our agents fought their shadow war, but finally the Order of Swords Masters of Hoeth turned against us. This brotherhood of oppressors and murderers was a most bitter enemy to our cause, and many heroes lost their lives in public executions, though many wrong suspects died as well, I might add, for we had woven our web of deception with care and attention. Finally, the ringleader of our agents, Girthon, the king's counselor, was unmasked. Threatened with torture, he decided to fight like a true elf, and slew the weakling Aethys. This plunged Ulthuan into chaos, and for this deed the name of Girthon shall be gloried forever in our legends. The day of blood and renewed war. The next choice to the throne of Ulthuan was truly laughable. Morvale was another prancing, effete scholar. I fondly remember the day when he sent a punitive expedition to Nagaroth. This day is remembered as the Day of Blood, and it is ranked as the greatest of our victories. An entire fleet, an armada of 100 ships, sailed into our trap and was annihilated at the Sea of Chill. We left none alive, and took our revenge for the sack of Arnlek. With the navy of Ulthuan crippled, our long-prepared counter-offensive was unleashed, spearheaded by drugged and screaming human slave warriors. Once more we erected the towers of Onlek and reconquered all our lands between the Isles and the Griffin Gate. These were the heady days of our glory. Victory after victory was ours, and countless numbers died on the altars of Khaine. Desperate, the lords of Ulthuan sent all their sons to war. Potters, carpenters, and dung-caked farmers. We slaughtered these lambs in their thousands. The only right decision Moraval made was to appoint Menthis of Calador as his general. He actually gave us quite some sport. With a huge numerical superiority of peasants and merchants, he finally pushed us back. We sprang ambushes and fought a fighting withdrawal, for we are loath to give up our ancestral lands easily. For each Drukhai life lost, we took the souls of 10 lackeys of Mor Vale. Finally, we were forced to abandon Onlek and cast the great black arcs adrift once more. Satisfied with the destruction of the armies of Ulthuan, we returned to Nagaroth, where already we were assembling our reserves. Upon hearing how many warriors he had lost, Mor Vale cast himself to the flames of a Saurian. He was the 3rd Phoenix King to take his own life. Ha! For 5,000 years, Malekith has ruled as the Witch King of Drukhai. He has not given any thought to the grave, only to the restoration of our kingdom. Truly the blood of gods flows in his veins, compared to the weak water which bloats the rulers of Ulthuan. The New Age and our glorious future. For the next 1,000 years we devoted our lives to increasing our influence over the world. Our black arcs ventured far and wide, from distant Cathay to the coasts of the old world. The human animals have learned to dread us, and the forges of Nagarond work day and night as the human, orc, goblin, and dwarf slaves toil to fill the armories of the Witch King. The libraries of Karond Ka are filled with 60,000 books of sorcery. The black stone tablets of Nagarond were carved so the legacy of our past would be carried to the generations that are to come. In the distant lands of the east, we routed the armies of Cathay and took 100,000 prisoners in a single day. In the southern jungles of Lustria, we discovered the last rotten fruits of the civilization of the old ones. We slew their reptilian guardians and ransacked their ruined temples, bringing their golden glyph plaques to our cities. From these our sorceresses gleaned much magical lore unknown to our enemies. We now hold the knowledge of the great magics of the past, which unleashed chaos upon this world, and know how to bend the 4 great powers to our will. Yes, we have become the ultimate masters of sorcery. Our gold and tales of the riches of Elven Kingdoms lured the savage Norse to harry the coasts of Ulthuan, weakening their navy and creating confusion. With our spells we ensorcelled the dragons of Calador, so they would slumber deeply and could not be roused against us in war. Just 3,000 years ago we made a pact with our old enemies, the Lords of Chaos, and our combined armies took the Blighted Isle and lands of Nagaroth. The Plague Fleet and the Black Arcs swept the seas clear of Ulthuan's navy. Our Lord Malekith himself returned to the soil of his rightful kingdom. With his leadership we won a score of great battles, and all the lands of Ulthuan, save for Calador, Safri, and the city of Lothern, were under our dominion. But thanks to the incompetence of our Chaos allies and the twice-accursed brothers Tyrion and Teclis, the final battle was lost, though much of Ulthuan was devastated. We recalled our armies, and the Witch King himself had to escape through the dark dimensions of the void. The current era is, to my mind, a time of consolidation and renewal. We have made great gains, and we have embraced this dusk time of the world with both hands. The next incursion of chaos is near, and we shall ride the storm of chaos and become like the gods themselves. Now we are finally ready, our plans flawless, our armies unmatched, our hatred undimmed. Final victory is within our reach. But I grow weary of scribbling, and I will rest, for tomorrow I will order my slaves to bring me my scimitar and the enchanted necklace made from the bones of my traitorous daughters, and I go to war once more. Serve the Witch King, young Drukai, and never forget your legacy. The sharp edge of the blade traced a thin line of blood across the cheek of the captured human. Bound by his hands and feet with black silk cord to the blood-stained altar, he struggled in vain. The witch elf lifted the dagger to her mouth, and with her delicate tongue licked the tip of the knife. A small globule of blood trickled slowly down from the lips of the priestess and onto her pale breast. She thrust her head back, and with both arms held high raised the curved ceremonial dagger above her head. Uttering a violent scream that came from deep within, she plunged the dagger down. The witch elf screamed out again in an even higher pitch, her gasping shriek mixed with a ritual chant. "Kayla Furdik Mensha Farmike Khaine!" The cries of her captive added to the chorus, the two blending together perfectly in the rite of death. Breathing out deeply, she withdrew the blade, letting it slip from her moist, blood-soaked fingers to clatter onto the temple floor. With a speed that even the most agile human could never match, she jumped up onto the altar, her thin but muscular legs astride the dying man's chest. Arching her back in a sleek curve, she slowly lowered her body until her face was inches from the wide-open eyes of her victim. Staring intensely into his motionless eyes for a brief moment, she leant down further, brushing her cheek against his. She pushed her deep red lips against his ear, letting her long dark hair fall across his face. In a soft, sultry whisper she spoke to him. As she spoke in the native tongue of her victim, her voice lost the sharp tones of the Drukai language. Now her voice had changed into a soft purr of satisfied content. "They say that your brain will continue to function for minutes after your heart has stopped. I can see the spark of life dying in your eyes." Her wicked smile increased as she ran a finger through the blood dripping from his cut cheek. "Know this, then, before you die. Your body will serve to pleasure me, long after your soul fades. I will drink from your wounds, and when my thirst is quenched, I will bathe in your blood. Only when your body grows cold will I throw the empty husk of your mortal shell for the beasts to rip asunder." She sat back up, squeezing her thighs tighter against the dead soldier. Her long, thin fingers delicately traced arcane runes in blood across his broad chest. Khaine would reward her well for this sacrifice, and tonight she would revel in his gift of eternal beauty. She felt herself suffused by the joy of the moment, rapture filling her mind. It lasted only a few heartbeats, though, and was soon replaced by the grim thought that Khaine was a capricious god, and tomorrow it might be her that was beneath the sacrificial blade. Lord Yeurl sat atop his cold one and looked at the human army arrayed before him while absently stroking his fingers over the rough texture of his orc hide saddle. "Do you think they mean to fight us?" he asked, turning to his advisor Khalek. "I believe they do, my lord," Khalek replied smoothly, letting his gaze pass over the assembled army from the lands known to the humans as Bretonnia. "They have many cavalry, sire, and we are on an open field." "Yes, they do," Yeurl replied, stifling a yawn. "Bring out the slaves, Khalek." "Sire." The advisor's face wore his usual bland expression, but the tone of his voice caused the young dark elf lord to frown. "Is there some problem with the slaves?" he asked quietly. "No, my lord Yeurl," Khalek answered quickly. "I am merely curious as to what cunning ploy my lord has devised." "Bring the slaves forth and you will see, my impatient counselor," Yeurl told him with a sly smile. The order was called out, and soon the slaves, nearly 500 of them, were being herded onto the field of battle, whipped along by the slave masters. "Let them go," Yeurl called out, and the ropes binding the slaves together were cut. They milled about in a confused fashion. "Flee, you verminous filth!" screeched Yeurl in the crude human tongue, standing up in his stirrups and shooting them away. The slaves gave him a final bewildered look, and then began to run towards the Bretonnian line. "My lord," protested Khalek, "think of your profits from this venture." "Khalek, old friend," Yeurl explained as if talking to a stupid human, "my profits are worthless if I do not survive to benefit from them." "Of course, my lord." Khalek nodded slowly. "How short-sighted of me not to consider that." Yeurl looked toward Saradane, the commander of the crossbowmen, and nodded once. The lithe dark elf raised his arm, and at the gesture 100 repeater crossbows were lifted to the firing position. Saradane's arm dropped, and the air was filled with a cloud of black shafts that tore into the fleeing slaves. Salvo after salvo rapidly followed, felling even more of the escaping humans as they began to slow and stumble over their dead comrades. One particularly lucky or agile man was still running, and soon the cheers of the Bretonnian army resounded across the field, encouraging the fleeing man. Saradane looked to Yeurl, who shook his head once. With another gesture, he commanded his warriors to lower their weapons. The roaring cheers of the Bretonnians were still rising. The escaped slave was now almost halfway across the field. With a nonchalant slowness, Yeurl reached down and unhooked his repeater crossbow from his saddle. Sighting along its length, he saw that a group of the Bretonnian commoners were riding out to fetch the bedraggled man, now stumbling with exhaustion towards them. Breathing slowly, Yeurl closed his eyes and pulled the trigger of the crossbow. The bolt flashed out across the grass of the meadow, but it was clear the shot would fall wide of its mark. As the bolt arced down, it veered in flight, turning to its right. A moment later, the magical dart was chasing down the slave, who glanced back over his shoulder and gave a scream a moment before the bolt took him square between the shoulder blades. The slave pitched forward, and the cheers of the enemy soon became moans of dismay and angry shouts. "Well, Khalek," Yeurl said smugly, waving an expressive hand to indicate the carnage just wrought. The bodies of the dead were piled in hummocks and mounds that littered the smooth expanse of grass. Already crows were descending to feast on the still warm bodies. Yeurl caught a faint glimmer of movement and noticed that 2 parties of his shades, his best scouts from the craggy mountains of Nagaroth, were already taking up position amongst the dead. "You were saying something about cavalry and an open field?" Khalek did not reply and hid his anger well, though the young lord still noted a hint of a frown. Yeurl held out his right hand, the fingers open. He sat there for a moment until a look of displeasure crossed his face. "My lance!" he snapped, turning to glare at the dark elf standing behind his mount, who hurried forward with the long, elegant weapon. He was new, and he wouldn't survive long if he didn't improve, thought Yeurl, as his long fingers closed around the padded grip of the lance. 2 ribbons, one of black, the other of ice blue, fluttered from its tip in the wind. Resting the lance in the ornate stirrup of his saddle, he turned to his left and spoke with the other knights. "It seems these humans want to fight us," he declared with a grin, causing his knights to erupt with a chorus of cheering. Kicking his wicked spurs into the flanks of his cold one, he led the advance, his knights forming up around him, the infantry running alongside to his left and right, taking cover amongst the piles of slave corpses. "I want their general's head," snarled Yeurl as the fighting spirit took hold of him. His blood coursed through his veins. He could feel his heart beating in his chest like the thunder of a storm. He was panting with exertion and anticipation as the unit wheeled to square off against the unit of Bretonnians surrounding the largest enemy banner. Yeurl assumed his opponent would be here and smiled to himself. Another trophy would adorn the walls of his keep when he returned to Nagaroth. "For Tor on Lek!" he bellowed, lowering his lance to full tilt. The humans were countercharging, but the mounds of dead impeded their horses. The whinnying of horses and the snarling of the cold ones filled Yeurl's ears. The dark elf could see the enemy general, his armor gilded and polished, glaring in the midday sun. He sat upon a fine black steed, one which Yeurl swore could have been bred in Nagaroth, such was its fiery temper. In his hand he wielded an etched blade, probably blessed, thought Yeurl, as he brought his lance point towards his foe. Their eyes locked, the human with his sword raised for a downward slash, his shield brought across his body to deflect Yeurl's lance. The human's eyes flickered away momentarily as his mount stumbled on a dead slave, and Yeurl made his move, hauling the cold one to the left and swinging the lance across to his other side. The Bretonnian duke tried to pull his shield across but was too late. Yeurl's lance punched through the armor beneath his upraised sword arm, smashing the duke from his saddle. His cold one leapt upon the black horse, its claws gouging into its chest in a spray of blood as its jaws closed on its throat. As Yeurl shrieked with joy, he looked about him. His knights were battling all around. A few had fallen, but not as many as the enemy. "Let your blades drink deep," he cried out to his comrades, discarding his lance and drawing a long sword from its scabbard. A lance was thrust towards his face from out of the melee, but Yeurl easily swayed out of its path, severing its tip with a casual flick of his blade. His counterattack crashed into the shield of the human, almost unhorsing him. Through the narrow visor, Yeurl could see the hatred burning in his foe's eyes, and felt invigorated by it. "Let their hatred flow," he told himself, "for I know what true hatred is." Snarling an oath, he brought his sword around in a whistling arc, slashing beneath his opponent's raised shield. At the last moment, the blade severing the knight's leg at the knee, Yeurl laughed into the sky as his opponent fell clumsily from his saddle with a clattering of armor. The human knights tried to scatter and run, but the cold ones had encircled them, and the few who were left were swiftly butchered. Gasping for breath, Yeurl pulled his helm free and gulped in the warm summer air. All around, the dead and dying Bretonnians littered the field amongst the corpses of the slain slaves. A fitting end for such beasts, Yeurl thought. To his right, he saw Saradane had surrounded the human peasants, and many held their hands up in surrender. Shielding his eyes against the glaring sun, Yeurl could see there were several hundred who begged for mercy, some wounded, others simply fearing for their lives. Yeurl was contented as he dropped off his cold one and searched amongst the dead knights for the general he had killed. He had more slaves to replace those he had been forced to kill, and, as he hacked off the lifeless head of the Bretonnian duke, he felt the warm rays of the sun bathing his face. Today was a good day. My lord, I have compiled on your instruction all the information that I can find concerning the forbidden practice of the worship of Khaine. Unfortunately, Johann Hellstrom, the first of the appointed theogonists, destroyed nearly all of the records in a purge of flame. Whilst I commend his diligence and wholehearted fervor to destroy the evil cult, I cannot help but feel that in our ignorance we have simply removed the body of the parasite, whilst its head still works its way through our arteries to our heart. Of the information I managed to recover, I was alarmingly disturbed at the findings, and would suggest an immediate council be appointed to deal with the threat. Unlike the chaos cults that more openly preach to the heathen masses, the worshippers of Khaine are far more secretive. From what little knowledge I possess on this subject, and the manuscripts I have recovered, I can without doubt be certain that even now, in these enlightened times, there are those who worship Khaine, the god of murder. Imperial records find that his worship can be traced back to the year 80 in the calendar of Sigmar, when agents of the Theogonist discovered the existence of a number of worshippers inside the town of Marienburg. They were of course burned at the stake, but not before torture revealed that the foundations of the cult were far deeper rooted than suspected. Many of the worshippers came from outlying farmsteads and villages who had come into contact with elven kind. It was at this point that I expanded my research to include elven literary records. For all elves, it would seem that Khaine is an integrated part of their belief. For even those elves who abhor his worship, Khaine is a necessary element to their way of life. Without pain there can be no pleasure. Without evil there can be no good. Such fundamental flaws in their beliefs would certainly explain their thirst for war against each other. The elves, from a province known as Nagaroth, were devout worshippers of Khaine, hardened by a constant struggle against the forces of chaos that descended from the north. The worship of Khaine gifted these elves with a necessary brutality. If I understand the context of their language, it would seem that they were a dark and somber race and reveled in self-indulgence. It was only through the worship of Khaine that they became a more focused nation, which ultimately led to civil war amongst their own kind. When the exiled elves fled west from Nagaroth, the worship of Khaine flourished in their new homeland. Few other religions can withstand the bloodshed that accompanies the worship of this dark god. Those who oppose him in their new land, which they named Nagaroth, soon find themselves upon an altar, doomed to be sacrificed in his name. The open worship of Khaine leads to war and depravity on a scale unsurpassed by any other following. Now is the time to be vigilant, the time for action. Who can say how many have already been sacrificed in Khaine's name in our own great empire? Who can tell how many of the murders that darken our streets each night are committed in his name? It is within the nature of those who worship Khaine to remain silent and breed sinisterly. But should this vile worship ever take hold within the general populace, then I fear a great destruction of public good. Therefore call a meeting of the council to discuss best how to deal with this threat. Sigmar protect us. A letter from the Grand Theogonist to Karl Franz, written shortly before the council ordered all libraries and monasteries to destroy any literature pertaining to Khaine. Lock up your children, shut all windows tight. The witch elves are hunting for victims tonight. When old hags do knock at your door, you must hide. Your death is the gift sought by Khaine's pretty brides. Traditional nursery rhyme sung on Death Night by dark elf children. A story of the sword of Khaine. The sun sank below the horizon, reflecting a myriad of colors on the surface of the sea. In the darkening twilight, on the cold, sandy beach, a warrior drew his sword. Silhouetted in a thick, unearthly mist to his left, he could make out the image of a shrine. That was why they were here. The treasure within the temple would decide which of the factions would control the fate of Ulthuan. The elf relished the coming battle. He felt the cold biting, and the combat would, at the very least, turn his attentions away from the sharp frost that gnawed throughout his entire body. He knew it would be a bitter and bloody fight, and something deep within his consciousness told him he would not live to see the conclusion. Pushing such thoughts aside, he advanced forward with the rest of his regiment. How dare the arrogant Avalornians invade his land? Had not he and his kin struggled for many years against the invasion of chaos? Many citizens of Nagaroth had died protecting the people of Ulthuan, and their reward was betrayal. For that, he would make them suffer. They were a proud, vain people, and that was their weakness. A deep rage began to swell inside him. This was his enemy. They had always been so. A young spearman, his features masked by the tall silver helm of his people, stepped from the mist to challenge him. His face was familiar. He had seen this Avalornian before. The warrior searched his memory for some scant recognition, but none came. He easily parried a low thrust. He had seen the attack coming and had learned how to defend from such moves. He had parried that blow 1,000 times now, bringing his blade upward in a powerful arc. He already knew it would kill the young warrior. His sharp steel cut a deep gash in the white tunic of the elf. A red stain spread across his chest as the Avalornian sank to his knees before being consumed by the mist that swirled at their feet. Another assailant stepped forward. His face too sparked some recollection in the warrior's eyes. Something deep within his consciousness told him that this warrior would trip and that this would be his undoing. Even as this thought passed through the dark elf's mind, his challenger stumbled on a rock, falling to the ground. The warrior thrust his blade down into the prone Avalornian's unprotected back, killing him instantly. In a brief respite, the warrior looked about the battlefield. To his left, another dark elf slew his opponent. This warrior's armor and family insignia were unfamiliar to him. How could that be? He knew the emblems of each of the noble lines of Nagaroth, and this was not one of them. What strange ally had joined them in the slaughter? He had no time to investigate further. A sword arced downwards. It would miss him by inches. It always missed. Again he recognized the features of his opponent, the scar on his cheek, the look of horror that would appear on his face when his armor was pierced. The warrior thrust out with his bloodied blade, his opponent's scale mail tearing open, allowing the sharp sword to slide through him with ease. The dark elf waited for another opponent to appear through the mist, but none would come. There were no more for him to slay. A route to the shrine lay clear in front of him now. Inside it lay the sword of Khaine, forged by the elf-smith god Yeurl. Such was its power that he who wielded it could challenge the gods themselves. If he could reach it, he could deliver it to Lord Malekith. Perhaps even he could use its powers to stop this war. He would bring peace to Ulthuan, uniting the elves together so once again they could rule supreme over the world. He ran up the black marble steps, although he knew that he would never reach the top. Here on the last step, he would meet his fate. Here he would die. Yet how? There were no warriors to stop him, no one to challenge him. Perhaps the emotion of battle had clouded his thoughts. A sharp sting struck him in his back, and he remembered, an instant before seeing, the arrowhead which had burst out of his chest. The warrior collapsed to his knees, slowly feeling his life ebb away, as it had done 1,000 times over. As suddenly as it had appeared, his body dissipated into the mist. One by one, each of the warriors fell, their bodies vanishing as they hit the ground. Generations of elves were doomed forever to fight each other in an afterlife of war. As the morning sun rose, the mists that shrouded the land cleared. The empty beach showed no signs that a battle had been fought the previous night. The sand dunes that covered the region were undisturbed by the marks of the skirmish. No carrion feasted on the flesh of the dead. Only the white bones of long-dead warriors rose from the wind-swept sands, destined to be reclaimed at some future time by the shifting dunes. The small band of shadow warriors that guarded the temple slipped silently down from the crest of a tall dune. They had spotted a group of Drukhai raiders making their way across the dune-filled plain and swiftly moved to intercept them. The next night, the spirits of yet more doomed warriors would swell the armies in the eternal struggle that was waged upon the blighted isle. A story of the high seas. Caliph Blackheart prodded his spear down through the gratings that kept the prisoners secure within the hold of the small ship. He could see the tall spiked towers of his homeland and was eager to refresh himself. He spat at one of the slaves. "The sooner we get to this city, the quicker I rid myself of your ugly company." He thrust the tip of his spear at the captive below him. The raiding party would be at the gates of Karant Kar within the hour. For Caliph, though, it was not soon enough. The sun was setting, and unless they picked up speed, the group would not make it to the city harbor before nightfall. The journey had been a rough voyage ahead, and Caliph was eager to get off the small vessel. He much preferred the safety of traveling in the massive black arcs. On this voyage alone, they had twice been forced to evade the attentions of the high elf patrol ships, and as they had neared the dire straits, a many-tentacled leviathan had surfaced, grasping a dozen crewmen from the deck of the ship and dragging them down to the dark depths of the ocean. Still, the ship was nearing its destination, and once the precious cargo had been unloaded, Khaleth doubted that he would have to make any similar voyages for many years to come. Slaves were a valuable commodity, and any dark elf noble willing to fund a raiding expedition could assure himself a great deal of wealth and prestige should it prove successful. His was a poor catch, though. Any slaves that had been worthy of capture had died in the defense of the village. The high elf warriors had put up a stout defense. Many of his corsairs had fallen in the attack, but against the black-barbed bolts of their repeater crossbows, they stood little chance. No living soul had been left within the village. His warriors had wanted to torch the dwellings, but Khaleth had refused them the pleasure. A deserted village would serve to haunt the dreams of any high elves that came across it. Those that had been left alive were either old and weak or very young. Still, they were now captives, and one way or another they would be put to good use by the dark elves. Those who were too frail to be put to work in the mines would find themselves on the sacrificial altars for the pleasure of Khaine's disciples. Even Khaleth had to suppress a shiver of fear as he thought of the fate awaiting those pitiful wretches. The Witch Elves had a unique talent for causing their victims to die an excruciatingly painful and agonizing death. The clouds that seemed to permanently hang over the city grew a menacing shade of black as the dark of night descended. Beneath these clouds, Khaleth could make out the sacrificial pyres of the city. The hundreds of souls that perished each day within the city would be burned on those fires of an evening. Many thought the black cloud that shrouded the city were a result of these sacrificial flames, and few ever questioned such belief. Khaleth could sense by the hurried shouts of the ship's captain that he too was dreading the imminent nightfall. The port of Karondkar was surrounded by jagged rocks, capable of tearing a hole in this small raiding ship as though it were soft flesh. But this was the least of the captain's fears. He was an experienced sailor and had navigated this route on many occasions. Karondkar, the City of Despair as it was also known, was the first stop-off point for the slave vessels returning from their raids on Ulthuan and the Old World. The strong winds that buffeted the tall spiked towers of the city carried with them an eerie howl. The corsairs had told him the noise was the screams of dead spirits, the ghosts of prisoners who had died in anguish and had been buried far from their home soil. Hundreds of slaves from every continent were brought to this busy port to be sold to rich nobles and slavers. The pyres served as beacons to guide the ships safely home, but nightfall brought with it a fresh and far greater menace. A shrill, piercing shriek from high in the dark sky reminded Khaleth all too well of this threat. Karondkar served as the home to the harpies. During the daylight hours, these creatures would roost upon the many tall towers that grew up from the city. Come dark, though, these deadly scavengers would fly above the city in great flocks, seeking out weak and easy prey. A ship still out at sea would make all too much an opportune target for Khaleth's liking. These creatures were said to have the ability to charm anyone with their enchanted songs, and Khaleth for one did not relish the prospect of what they would do to him once they had him under their spell. The captain, too, had heard the harpy's high-pitched scream, and as more followed he began to bark orders to the crew. Khaleth, the slave master, did not need to be told his duty. Unlocking the iron bars, he ordered the nearest slave out of the hold. The slave climbed up the ladder slowly, his progress impeded by his shackles. Khaleth grabbed hold of the chain and dragged the slave to the upper deck. He was a mere youth. Khaleth guessed his age to be less than 100. The defense of the village would almost certainly have been the first combat the boy would have seen. Still, if he was prepared to fight as a warrior, then he should know the consequences. Quickly he caught a rope thrown to him from the rigging and hoisted the prisoner up the mast. The youth held his head high and remained silent. He would have made a fine warrior given a few decades more training. Tying the other end of the rope to the foot of the mast, Khaleth ran to join the corsairs who had drawn their swords and held them in a defensive position. Khaleth could not suppress a smile of anticipation at the forthcoming spectacle. The wild flapping of leather wings caused him to stare up towards the bound victim. He could make out 5 or 6 of the creatures in the dim light, grotesque wings and black bestial scale-covered legs gave way to a voluptuous female body. Their wild hair blew in the wind. Khaleth was entranced by their strange feral beauty, and could quite easily see how legends told them they were the spirits of witch elves slain in battle. They hovered around the sacrificial offering for a brief moment before one of them screeched and attacked the youth, raking long talons at his unprotected body. As the dread monsters ripped the young elf apart, his screams merged with the chorus of waves crashing against nearby rocks and the savage cries of the harpies. They were in a feeding frenzy, lashing out at the prey. Each snarled ferociously at each other as their razor-sharp claws ripped great gashes across the chest of the prisoner. One by one they flew off, carrying the severed limbs of their victim back to their roosts. As the last of them flapped its wings to head home, the gnawed rope fell down to the ship deck, landing in a pool of blood at the foot of the mast. With the harpies' stomachs full, the ship and its crew would be granted safe passage now, and Khaleth looked forward to the small but welcome purse he would receive for his catch. The captain barked out commands to steer the ship to the docks. Khaleth walked towards him, waiting until he had issued his commands before engaging him. That youth could have fetched me a tidy sum at the markets. The captain turned to face him. It was worth the cost to save my crewmen. You will of course be compensated for your loss, as usual. A Story of Malekith. The great jaw snapped shut, ripping the high elf in two. The dismembered torso fell to the ground, and the dragon arched its neck and searched for a new victim. The row of sharp spears thrust in vain at the hard scales that protected the tough dragon hide. With one mighty swing of his blade, the Witch King beheaded 3 of his assailants. As their limp, lifeless bodies hit the floor, the attack wavered. Even the brave high elves knew that to fight such a powerful opponent was sheer folly. The dragon let out a deafening roar, and with that, the spearmen broke. As they turned to escape, the great beast took in a deep breath, filling its massive lungs. With another loud bellow, it released a cloud of thick, noxious gas that enveloped the fleeing troops. In a matter of seconds, each soldier was brought to his knees, gasping in vain for breath. Their lungs had been burnt by the corrosive acids in the dragon's breath. Each of them would suffocate to death in excruciating pain. Malekith dug his heels into his stirrups. It was the signal that his mount was to take to the air. The beast stretched out its wings to their full span. casting a dark shadow over the blood-stained earth below. With just a couple of beats, it had risen from the ground, and, with an agility that was belied by the monster's size, it hovered over the carnage below. From his high vantage point, the Dark Elf King could see that the battle was faring well. The charge of the Cold One Knights had broken the left flank of the High Elf line. Once through the solid formation of spearmen, the savage beasts had borne down upon the lines of archers with remarkable speed. His warriors had been victorious, and, even as he looked around, were now gathering the captured High Elves into lines. The ancient ruined palace of Onlek was now his again to rebuild and fortify. From here his forces could once more strike at the heart of Ulthuan. He issued a command to the dragon, and it covered the distance between him and the ancient castle with remarkable speed. The creature landed upon the cracked marble stairs that had once led up to the throne room. From this palace Malekith and his mother Morathi had held court. He and his father alone understood the need for war. From this very land had his father not saved the fate of those elves who now spat insults at his son. Malekith leapt down from his saddle and strode up the stairs toward the ruined entrance of the throne room. Though the roof had long since collapsed, the doors to the room were barred before him. Did the fools really believe that they could deny the rightful heir entry to his own throne room? With a single whispered word uttered from the mouth of Malekith, the ancient doors cracked before bursting open. A sorcerous wind tore through the small chamber, creating whirlwinds of dust and debris. Malekith found it strange that there had been no guard posted at the doors. Were the High Elves so vain in their own pride that they thought their army undefeatable? "Come no further, vile Drukhai. This is not your realm to rule." The hidden challenger who spoke was calm and showed no sign of fear of the king of the Dark Elves. "And who is this that dares tell me I may not rule over what is mine?" The Witch King hissed out his reply, hatred boiling through his words. From behind the broken stone dais, where the throne once sat, a single warrior stepped out. On his head he wore the ornate feathered helm of Ivresse, and the Witch King could sense a powerful magical field emanating from the sword the warrior held in his hand. In an instant, Malekith knew who stood before him. "Ah, the impetuous Eltharion! Has your vanity grown so great that you believe you can challenge me? Come, fool, meet your doom." As Malekith spoke his challenge, Eltharion raised his sword in preparation for the combat. Malekith had little doubt he could slay the young warrior, but he would not give Eltharion the satisfaction of honorable combat. Pointing his armored gauntlet at the High Elf hero, he uttered a single word. In an instant, Eltharion felt a darkness surround him. He clutched at his throat, unable to breathe, his entire body coursed with pain, as though his blood had been turned to molten lead. Tears of blood poured from his eyes, and he fell to his knees in agony, his fanged sword slipping from his grasp. The Witch King let out a malicious laugh. "You pitiful wretch! Had you led your valiant men on the battlefield instead of cowering inside this palace, then you may have stood a chance of defeating me. Know this before you die. None tread on my land without my word. Those who dare defy me suffer death." The Witch King stepped over to where Eltharion lay, and with a strength disguised by his thin, armor-bound body, he picked up the high elf by his neck and dragged him to the open doors. Over 100 high elves knelt in a long line, their hands tied behind their backs and their necks exposed. Over each of them stood one of Malekith's elite executioners, holding their terrible blades high in readiness. How fitting that the Warden of Yvresse will be the first to acknowledge my succession to the throne of Ulthuan. For your loyalty, I will spare the lives of your men. They are but misguided fools, and under my rule they will learn the error of their ways. Eltharion's pain multiplied tenfold with the knowledge that he had the lives of his men in his hands. But for his pride, he could perhaps save those soldiers who had fought with him so valiantly on the shores of Nagaroth. He knew, though, that he could never bow to Malekith. His men would not wish it so either. With his last strength, he raised his head in defiance. "You are but a prince of darkness." As the words passed his lips, his body sagged and fell into unconsciousness in the grasp of Malekith. In a dark rage, the Dark Elf Lord picked up the body of the noble hero, holding it over his head, before casting him down the stairs. "Have my most skilled torturers see that his spirit is broken, and his body becomes little more than an empty husk," he ordered one of his commanders. "What information would you have us extract from this sorrowful excuse for an elf, my lord?" The commander bowed. "There is nothing that this one can tell me. Once they have had their pleasure, have what is left of the noble elf sent back to Lothern. It will be a warning of the fate of any who dare stand between me and what is rightfully mine." Malekith's eyes betrayed no sign of emotion, frozen in a deadly stare of contempt at the wounded Eltharion. "And what of the prisoners?" the commander inquired. "Kill them. Kill them all." His order was met by the dull thud of elven heads as they were brutally separated from their torsos. As he walked back into the throne room and sat on the cold stone dais, a smile passed his lips. Such slaughter would be the fate of any who defied him. The weak would die in order that the strong prevail. Dark power. Inside the dark chamber, the flickering light of a dozen candles illuminated the exotic and macabre ornaments that filled the sweet-smelling room. The sorceress stood over a small boiling cauldron, adding the last few ingredients into the black pot. As she sprinkled in a fine powder from her long, delicate fingers, it sparked into a dark blue flame. The potion was nearing completion, and any mistake in the ritual preparation could now prove fatal. In a deep, resonant voice, she made the final incantation, the words spilling from her lips. It was as though the words had a life of their own. With each new one, the air around the sorceress grew heavier. This was an old tongue, and the ancient words had the ability to destroy the very essence of life itself. Morathi felt the magical power which she was summoning growing in strength. It was probing her mind, searching for a path through which it could escape. The energies carried on growing, and Morathi could feel her mind begin to surge. Visions of distant lands, the past and the future formed before her. Should she choose, she could visit any of these worlds and travel through the corridors of this strange dimension. Quickly clearing her thoughts, she focused upon releasing the spell. A dark aura grew, and she could feel her long hair writhing and snaking with a life of its own as the magical essence was absorbed into her entire body. Pointing her finger at the cauldron, sparks of energy flashed about her. With the command of a single word, the magical energy was released, and a bolt of black light burst from her hand into the bubbling liquid. Morathi turned away from the cauldron, letting her body relax. Such concentration drained her of great amounts of strength. The dark powers had almost overcome her and lured her away from the real world. Had she chosen to travel down the paths open before her without the correct preparation, even she, the most powerful sorceress in the world, would have been easy prey to the demons and dark creatures which stalked that realm. Morathi lay down on a luxurious 4-poster bed, collapsing upon the silk covers which enveloped her body. Against the black cloth her curved, sleek figure was a contrasting white in color. Her skin was smooth and almost like marble. Upon her body there were no wrinkles of age. There was still much work to be done before the potion was complete. She would have to carefully distill it into her small vials, and even this simple task had its own dangers. Dealing with any form of magic was always a complex affair, but Morathi was well practiced in such arts. As one of the oldest mortals to still walk the world, she had by now acquired a great deal of skill in the dark arts. For now, though, Morathi was content to rest on her bed, as practicing with such power always tired her, and she felt in need of rest. "I trust I'm not disturbing you." A voice came from her doorway. Morathi turned to face the uninvited visitor. There was but one person who would have the tenacity to enter her chamber without warning: her son Malekith. "The Hag Queen has called council at the feast of Khaine. She has proof that the cult of Slaanesh has once again been active. She specifically requested you attend." Her son spoke as though he were some simple messenger rather than the king of his realm. Morathi smiled. He had learnt to use tact well. His voice betrayed no emotion. Malekith approached the bed and sat down on the edge. Morathi sat upright, her silk robes revealing a sleek and ageless body beneath them. His armor was still coated with the blood of those slain in a recent battle. He removed his helmet, and a long mane of silver-white hair fell about his shoulders. His scarred face brought a fleeting stab of pain to Morathi. Even 4,000 years after her son had been terribly marked, the anguish she felt when reminded of that fateful day had not diminished. She knew it never would. Ah, Helebron, will she never learn that it is only through my will that her petty coven of hags still practice their primal arts? I could crush her with a single word. In truth, they are my creatures. I do not serve the Witch Elves. They serve me. Morathi let out a small, contemptuous laugh. "Then do I assume you will not be attending the feast, mother?" Malekith's tone was still colorless. If he had an opinion on whether she should attend or not, he was not freely giving such information away. Morathi was pleased her son was learning so much about the subtlety of politics and the importance of controlling his speech. He had yet to learn fully the extent to which his tone, speech, and indeed silence could be read by his opponents and used against him. "Malekith, I am impressed by your reserve, but you still have much to learn. I am bound to attend, but it is not because Helebron so commands. Should I choose, I would have her killed tonight, but in doing so I would not gain. In fact, my power would be weakened." Malekith turned an unattentive head towards his mother. Though he despised her for reminding him of his weakness, she was right. His mother had a wisdom he could gain from. When this purpose was no longer of value to him, he would punish her for her contemptuous attitude towards him. Until that day, though, he was content to learn from her, to suckle from her knowledge. Morathi raised her hand, tenderly stroking her son's face as she continued. Helebrand's power over me is but one of the many lies that perpetuate her existence. It is one of the strengths of our culture, my son, that we do not readily embrace the truth. Each of the noble houses is built on the foundation of a lie. They believe that they have earned their power, and it is theirs to command. Ours is the only power in this kingdom. All else is but an illusion of grandeur. The truth behind such lies, my dearest Malekith, is that their power is little more than a gift to them from you. Morathi stroked her son's hair. She knew this always had a relaxing effect on him. It is also a gift which we can take back at will. Malekith smiled at his mother's words. She had a way of bringing clarity to him. I attend the feast to perpetuate the lie, my son. Helebrand believes that she rules the temples. She truly believes that through her devotion, the temple of Khaine is the sole religion of our people. In doing so, she underestimates how deeply rooted the worship of Slaanesh and his dark arts reach, and thus my sorceresses gain in power, unseen by the Witch Elves. Lies are power. They have the ability to change history, and history is built upon the lies of the victor. Morathi laid back upon the bed and motioned for Malekith to join her. Come, my son. You must be tired after your little battle. Lie with me and tell me how bravely you fought. A note on dark magic. The chaotic nature from which dark magic draws much of its power attracts many malevolent spirits and dark sprites. They feed off the mysterious energies that are released, and as a result, can often be found hiding in the shadows around sorceresses or other creatures of a magical nature. They are petty thieves, stealing away any small objects that take their fancy. But perhaps their most sinister act is the kidnapping of young babies. Nobody knows to what purpose they will occasionally steal away a child, but many a mother has woken to find her newborn babe vanished from the safety of its crib. A note on an unknown enemy. The underworld sea is a vast labyrinth of tunnels and caverns that honeycomb the land beneath the Black Spine Mountains. Their chance discovery by the Dark Lord of Hag Graef meant that the raiding fleets of the Dark Elves now had the freedom of the oceans. Where once the superior naval capabilities of the High Elf fleet had confined the Dark Elves, now they were free to strike anywhere at will. The tunnels are fraught with peril, and even on the main causeways, hundreds of strange and terrible monsters lurk. Tales tell of a fearsome race of creatures who prey upon the raiders, but such legends are dismissed by the Dark Elf nobility as the ramblings of weak-minded fools. The howling of alarm horns woke Deleketh from his slumber. As well as his own tower's alarm, he could make out at least 3 separate horns sounding out in the distance. He did not feel well rested. His sleep had been disturbed with terrible visions of dark and monstrous creatures. There were many Drukhai who went insane due to the terrible nightmares which those who guarded the northern lands of Nagaroth would suffer. It was not uncommon for a warrior to throw himself from one of the tall towers which were dispersed at regular intervals across the land. Others would murder their fellow guards before taking their own lives. A sneer crossed over the sharp, cold face of Deleketh at the thought. Those warriors were weak. They deserved to die. Deleketh hastily put on his chainmail and grabbed his crossbow before running up the steep, narrow spiral stairway. He reached his designated spy hole and looked out to see what danger approached. Looking out to the east, he could see that a dank mist had already enveloped the neighboring tower. An uneasy feeling crept over him, causing his stomach muscles to tighten. He had never seen a mist so dense or that rose so high before. Thick tendrils of the eerie fog reached up to his portal. Like writhing tentacles, they seeped through as though they were trying to grab him. Peering down into the gray swirling cloud, he spied movement. Something was rapidly ascending the open stairway that surrounded the tall pinnacle. The watchtowers reached hundreds of feet up into the sky, long, thin bastions of rock, atop of which was built a small stronghold. They had been constructed as the first line of defense against the incursions of chaos that would sporadically sweep down from the northern wastes. He rammed a cartridge of bolts home into his repeater crossbow and readied his aim towards the stairs. Whatever was climbing the tower was doing so quickly, and he knew it would be upon them soon. Deleketh heard the sound of guards firing their weapons from the level below, followed shortly afterwards by the unmistakable clatter of battle being met. Then he saw the first of his attackers as it scrambled up onto the tower platform. It was huge. Monstrous horns were silhouetted throughout the mist, and in its hands it wielded a massive sword. Behind it came another, then more. Deleketh did not hesitate. He fired a salvo of bolts into the monsters. The first fell, tumbling off the stairs, but more swiftly took its place. The sound of hundreds of bolts whistling from their crossbows filled the corridor, but still the creatures came at them. For each one that fell, another two seemed to spring from the fog. From the level above, Deleketh could hear the sound of a Reaper bolt thrower. Its massive missiles shrieked as they sailed into the mist, followed by a dull thud as they struck home. There were too many of these creatures for the crew of the machine to miss. For a short while, Deleketh could see that they were winning. The demons were not managing to close in on their position before being mowed down by the intense amount of missile fire. Then the lord of this horde appeared. First he heard a monstrous roar that pierced even his cold heart with fear. Then he spied the source of the sound. It swooped down from the sky, a massive creature towering over even the tall demons which swarmed up the tower. Its two monstrous wings were open wide, slowing the being's descent as it landed at the top of the stairwell. In its hand, a huge flaming whip lit up the darkness of the mist, revealing even more of the smaller demons. With renewed ferocity, the dread host charged at the fortress. The speed of the assault surprised Deleketh, and he was glad to hear the order to retreat. Springing up a stairway behind him, he heard the metallic groan of the portcullis buckling. With a deafening crash it broke, and the demon horde poured into the tower. Behind him came the screams of those who were not fast enough to escape. Reaching the top of the stairs, his heart dropped as he saw the guards closing it. Cursing their souls to Khaine, he looked for another avenue of escape. A few steps back, he had passed a door leading into a storeroom. Charging through the small doorway, he turned and bolted the thick wooden timbers shut. Quickly surveying his surroundings, he realized that there was no escape from this small room. only the 4 solid stone walls and a bolted door in front of him. From outside he could hear the demons' claws as they raked on the stone stairway, and from a gap under the door he spied their menacing shadows as they passed by his hiding place. Deleketh's heart beat fast as he waited for the demons to burst through the door. But none came. He heard the screams of those on the level above as the foul minions of chaos broke through the upper defenses, followed by a period of eerie silence. As Deleketh sat at the rear corner of the small room, his mind raced. The demon host intent on killing those on the upper level must have missed him. How long had passed? Had the demons left? His mind twisted with 1,000 unanswered questions. Then, movement from under the small gap at the base of the door broke his confused train of thought. As he watched, a tendril of mist crept into the room. Glowing luminescent in the darkness, it cast terrifying shadows on the walls. Backing himself into the far corner of the room, Deleketh drew his dagger to stab at the snake-like mist that seemed to be reaching out towards him, flooding into the enclosed room from under the door. Lord Dranak dismounted from his black dragon. As commander of the northern wasteland, it was his duty to investigate any incursions into dark elf territory. "Report." He turned to address the dark elf guard who sprinted to meet him. "2 of the towers were taken, Lord," the guard replied, trying to catch his breath. "The mists have retreated now, and our scouts have been able to enter them." The guard stood to attention as he addressed his master. "What of the survivors?" the Druchii lord coldly asked. "None, my lord," the guard replied. "Both towers were completely deserted, save for the body of a single guardsman, which we found locked within a storeroom. It would appear that he took his own life, rather than face the demons." The Dark Lord sneered in contempt. "He was weak. He deserved to die."